What I think we've got to get our heads around is that the economic system that ran the world since the late 1980s until today blew up in 2008. Now, it didn't just blow up, it blew up in an irreparable way. If you've ever had a fridge or a stereo or a car that malfunctions in a way that cannot be repaired, it's a write-off. That's the image you should have in your mind about the economic system. But we found ways to keep it going. It's the equivalent, to use another metaphor, of life support. We put the economic system, broken though it was, on life support, and the life support globally is $12 trillion worth of free money printed by central banks. In a system that said the state and the central bank should never help the private sector, the banks should never be bailed out by the state should have no role in the economy, well, the state, in the form of bailouts to car companies, insurance companies, banks, and the central banks in the form of $12 trillion of free money and zero interest rates, which means functionally, for most capitalists, employers, rich people, money is not only cheap or free, it's actually, and it's a weird concept, it actually costs less than zero. This is a weird thing. Money is free for rich people. That's what put the economy on life support. And if you look at Bradford, and if you go to other big cities, you see what that means. An ordinary business can't survive. Lots of small shops, lots of small factories, lots of small, say, cleaning firms really find it difficult to survive. But if you have a business linked to property, and property speculation is booming because of this free money, then if you see a new business opening a new building, what is likely is that the rent for that new business is so low they can survive because they're only there as shop window dressing for the person who intends to sell the building to yet another investor fueled by this free money, and it can be from Hong Kong, China, Indonesia. That's, when you walk down a high street, that's what you see. You're not seeing prosperity, you're seeing life support. Now, economies can last a long time on life support. And Mark Carney, our central banker, said in March last year in Shanghai, we can do even more. We could, if we wanted to, drop 10K into everybody's bank account for free. If it gets bad, they'll do it. So they can keep the economy ticking over like this. Very nice for rich people, very nice for people who want to invest in new apartment blocks and new shopping centres. Very bad for everybody else because our wages are not rising. In fact, as inflation picks up, our real wages are stagnating and falling. So you can keep the economy on life support, but what you can't keep on life support is the human brain. Because the human brain says, hold on a minute, how is this supposed to work? How's my children, how am I supposed to get richer? How am I, when I go to work, aren't I supposed to feel better after a year's work and more wealthy, not poorer? And how's my son or daughter going to get on in life? What's the theory of how this works? Well, they haven't got a theory. They know it's on life support. It's just good enough to keep it ticking over. And what we've seen, in answer to your question, over the last, I say 2 years, actually from 2014, from the Scottish Indie referendum, in Britain and elsewhere, people go, well, if there's no answer to how things get better under the current arrangements, I want a different arrangement. What have you got, please? Now, the tragedy is the political centre says nothing. More of the same. There is no alternative to this. All there is the same. The right say, we have got an alternative. You know, this global system, which says that if you're in a global system and you're in Bradford earning, a median wage, 18, 20, 25K, the global system will only push that wage in one direction, and it ain't up. It is down. Likewise with your living standards. You go to a big banking conference, you say capitalism's terrible. And they'll sit there and they'll pull out this graph that shows 60% of people in the world have gained from free market capitalism. It just so happens that very few of them live in developed world countries. We have not gained. And so it's completely logical that working class people, middle class people, people dislocated, people with no clue about what is going on, when they hear, we have an answer, get rid of the global system, get rid of globalization, adopt an economic nationalist framework and policy, and we'll solve your problem. We'll give you a job, and we'll make your country great again. That's no surprise. And what's the biggest tragedy? That the left, I mean, I think we do. I think Labour does have and you'll see it rolled out over the next 10 days, very clear answers to these things, even so far as they've not been rolled out so far. But nobody wants to listen, because all my peers in the media, all the people who I've worked with for 10, 15 years in places like the BBC and Channel 4, with some exceptions, but not many, were brought up to believe that system that blew up was perfect. They went to the best universities in the world, not the middle-sized ones, the best. Stanford, NYU, Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne. And what were they told? This is the perfect system. It can't get any better. And so they have no answers. They don't want to listen to our answers. And I'm afraid the problem is they look at the right's answers, and this is the worst thing, for some it starts to make sense. For whoever's making the decisions to put Nigel Farage on Question Time every other week, it must make sense that makes sense. So that's sorry, a little bit long, but that's my answer to where the rising chaos in the world comes from that we are having to deal with.
So talking about that sort of economic uncertainty and crisis, sort of post-Brexit, Theresa May saying very clearly in the media that this election is about Brexit, yet there's no real thought-out plan. And you look at the IMF, who are clearly saying that without that plan, we're talking about 5% being taken off GDP. Yeah. So how do we respond to it? People here in Bradford and hold Theresa May to account for having no plan.
I think what I'd say is that some of you might be old enough to remember, you might have been children in the 30s, in the 1930s, or some of you might be even have been young adults in the 30s. I'm looking around the room. But apart from that, most of us have lived our lives in a relatively stable era. You know, big things have happened, but not every day. And my warning, especially to young people, is that you kind of grew up in a world that was quite stable. And there's a cultural commentator, Mark Fisher, who died this year, late last year, who pointed out that the stability of the world even leads to sort of the cultural staticness. So that you can go in the hairdressers. When I go in my hairdressers, they play things like the Beatles or Young Hearts Rung Free or pop disco hits of the 1970s. Not ironically, they're still there. Mark pointed out that culture's just been stagnant. There was as far from Glenn Miller to the Beatles, much less time than there is from 1960s and 70s music to now. And we're still playing it. Why? Because we've been trapped in this forever present that can never change. Nothing shocking happens. Well, you're going to wake up every day to news headlines that will shock you from now until an unpredictable end point to this crisis. And so what does that mean? Why am I saying this? Is because Theresa May's actions fit into that. The Tories didn't know they wanted to leave Europe until an unfortunate coalition of people with a genuine grievance and people with very, very crazy grievances decided to mandate we're going to leave Europe. Once they realised there was mileage in it, they flipped overnight to be a Leave party. Now, the overwhelming majority, I would say, of business decision makers and finance decision makers in this country do not want to leave. And they certainly don't want to leave in a way that threatens the expulsion of 3 million European Union-born migrant workers who British business and the public sector rely on. So your mind boggles. Where does it come from, this rationale to leave Europe for so aggressively? And then, by the Tory conference last year, what has developed was by two extra narratives. One, hard Brexit, the choice of a chaotic, crisis-ridden, new headline every day, hard Brexit. Why? Because it gives you an enemy. We know the Tories love enemies. Galtieri, Argentina, was a gift. to Margaret Thatcher, and he saved an administration that was on the point of collapse. That's, for those of you who don't remember, that's what happened. Thatcher was in trouble until the Falklands War. They love external enemies, and know they've got one. And what happened this week is that they pressed the button on fighting that external enemy. So they basically said, we're going to walk away from any kind of diplomatic sort of constructive engagement with a market of 500 million people, where thousands of British students and 500,000 British people are in there working in this thing. To know that's the enemy. And the horrible thing is large numbers of British people are totally prepared to believe it, and we have to stand firm against it. But what is the new outcome of that? And we learned it yesterday. Theresa May's been marching around the country going, lend me your vote. Now we know who she was asking. She was asking the hard right, xenophobes and racists of UKIP to lend her vote, and they have. And I think they lent it to her on a long-term loan, I would imagine. There's no need to go back. That's what that guy, Douglas Carswell, the one MP, the first and last UKIP MP, as he put it himself, said yesterday. Theresa May, might as well have said Maggie, Theresa May all the way now. So in the space of a week, the Tories have ripped up any negotiating strategy with Europe, and they've formed an electoral alliance with UKIP. And, I think we have to train our minds, and I don't mean just we in this room, I mean the leadership of Labour can't be used to a tramline kind of set of ideas that they've had all their lives, and that whenever asked, they just trot out the same answers. History is being made in front of your eyes, and I think that therefore we have to, today, this morning, change the way we're fighting this election. I've said this before. I think we have to say to everybody else progressive in Britain, lend us your votes. Or, in some cases where we can't win, we'll lend you ours. It's a one-off. You'll notice Theresa May isn't fighting this as a conservative. The word conservative is not on the propaganda. It's just Theresa May in blue, lend me your vote, and I'll deliver hard Brexit, and I'll play and I'll empower your xenophobia. And I think as well, it's going to get nastier because I was on. People may have seen Newsnight last night, and there's lots of vox pops, and the news keeps playing them, don't they? Theresa May is in favour of working class people. Just work it out. What does that mean? We study the way right-wing thought is expressed in Britain. Academics study it, political activists do. It's always expressed in code. So if you hear somebody talk about animal rights in Stoke-on-Trent, what they mean is halal meat. But they talk about animal rights. If you hear them say, I'm going to boycott Walker's crisps, what they mean is they want to punish Gary Lineker for his defence of anti-racism. I think increasingly when you say Theresa May's backing working class people, you should just insert one word into that sentence, white. That's what it means. Theresa May is making an overt pitch to white, racist UKIP voters to back her and lend her the votes. And we've just got to go in Bradford, in Brighton, in where I live in Vauxhall, and say, who's the best person to stop this? And that's a new thought for many of us. I just think it's an inescapable thought because, as I said on Newsnight last night, actually, as long as the liberal conservatives of the David Cameron era, many of whom are appalled by the people who are now joining the Tories, I mean, I'm not making this up, a Tory peer said to me, I am appalled by the kind of people who's joining in my area, right? If they can maintain an alliance from the liberal Tories to the hard right racists, they can win any election they want to be in. Now, 2 years' time, the Euro elections, you can just go on winning it. So what are we going to do?
So are you saying ultimately then, Paul, so come June the 8th, progressive alliances are the only way Labour can beat the Tories?
I think it's impossible to construct a progressive alliance in 4 weeks. Yeah. Okay, so, and also Labour Party rules don't allow you to do it. There's almost a mandated position of standing. Now, I have to say, I think that some of the I think Corbyn is wrong if he really thinks that it can't be done, but I think that the biggest opposition to it is coming from that wing of Labour which spectacularly failed to win in West Midlands, right? The Tom Watson wing of Labour. What they're saying is carry on as normal. Because, all right, I think every Labour MP and I think every Labour person, bar maybe John Woodcock in Barrow, actually wants to win, but I think some are, and this is a tragedy, some are preparing to basically go down fighting in the old way. I just don't want to go down fighting in the old way. I saw the miners do it in 1984-5. It was a magnificent way, unlike the way we're being offered now. But going down fighting in the old way, what do you end up with? Commemorative plate. Okay? I don't want a commemorative plate, because while I've got the commemorative plate on my mantelpiece, some nurse is queuing up at a food bank because their wages don't cover their food bill. Commemorative plates aren't good enough. So we have to not fight in the old way, and I think that therefore we from below can begin to construct basically just tactical alliances to deliver the progressive vote where it needs to be delivered. And I think, we're all empowered, we all have a smartphone, we all have the ability to work out what's going on in our local area, and I think we should. If people are worried about it, let's have that argument out in a friendly way, but let's have it out now, because the alternative is to say to somebody in a place in say the southwest of England. No, there's some very good Labour strongholds in the southwest of England, working class towns. Often they're trapped within a big constituency of middle class and farming and fisher people who are not going to vote Labour but might vote Lib Dem. And I just think if we did one thing, we symbolically stood down one person in Brighton Pavilion to set Caroline Lucas in, and if we symbolically stood down one person against a Lib, it would give a signal, and that's all you have to do. But right now, I'm not sensing in the Labour HQ there's much appetite for that. But then again, they only got up 2.5 hours ago, or 3 hours ago, and looked at the newspapers and had time to think. So I think this weekend might decide Labour. I would certainly like it to decide Labour to empower those of us who want to do it to stop the Tories. And if we can stop them, and they fragment, and the alliance fragments again, and there's plenty of people in the Tory party waiting in the wings to try and regain control for the liberal, internationalist, relatively globalist, sort of big business finance wing of the Tories. If they regain control and UKIP grows again, then fine, we can stop having to do these things. Because if you, I don't want to kind of teach my grandmother to suck eggs, but if you've studied the electoral logic of most constituencies, there's about 5,000 to 10,000 UKIP votes that if they just flip to the Tories, Labour's finished. We have to get on this wave, and I think we can. And I think it will be dramatic if we turn this around, but they know it's possible. The one thing you have to believe is that voting gap projected of 11% is a closure, that there are good breakdowns that was only sent to me half an hour ago, so I can't read them out, but good breakdowns. For example, in the total mayoral elections, Labour had a clear, like 46% of all votes. The Tories were only 30-something. And that where we did it right, like in Greater Manchester, Greater Manchester is like Greater Yorkshire in a way. There's plenty of Tories, there's plenty of people with brand new SUVs, there's plenty of accountants. Andy Burnham, so we're not just talking about inner Manchester with a kind of, mank kind of guy limping along in his tracksuit. No, we're talking about the big modern economy. Andy Burnham won in every ward. Every ward. So it's not impossible, and they know it, and I think the youth vote is key. This is why when we talk about what to do, which we hopefully might do, I would say if we can get young people to register and then get them to vote for us, or get them to join in the idea of an anti-Tory vote, we can win. I do believe it, and I keep getting ridiculed for saying it. But there's one final thing I want to say before we... To them, you asked me about, somebody struggling to get by. How do they connect this to bigger things? We need to show them, as well as their vision thing that we've got, how nasty the Tories are. In fact, it will never be the party, Labour's official attack line. But I think, they're not strong and stable, they're weird and nasty, is what I think. And a lot more besides. And when you see a mum, standing on that aisle in Tesco's or Sainsbury's with all the yellow labels on it, waiting for 4 o'clock when you can buy the cheap stuff, and you get angry, which I do, and you meet that person on the doorstep, you've got to talk to them. You can't just do the Labour thing. Are you voting? Tory, thanks, goodbye. You can't do that. You've got to talk to them. And what you need to say to them, this weird and nasty government thinks about you is this. In their ideology, if you are poor, it's your fault. In Labour's ideas system, what we believe, if you are poor, it's their fault. It's really simple. And if you don't accept it's their fault, you must ask yourself why. What is it in the world that makes one guy able to drive a brand new Audi SUV that costs more than double what you could ever earn in a year and own a block of flats and rent them out? What is it that does that? What's that called, please? Do you know? That's where I would argue with them. Because the idea that nothing can change is really a form of victim self-blaming by poor people, by people who are really whose lives are being destroyed by this economic system that doesn't work. And we've seen it done so many times in history. We saw it done in America. We saw it done in South Africa under apartheid. We've got to be a movement that gives people pride in who they are. And I think it is time that Labour took those lessons that we learned from, say, the South African anti-apartheid struggle, people in Black Lives Matter in Ferguson, where you go into some of the poorest neighbourhoods and you say, you know what, you can change history. Go into the poorest neighbourhoods of Bradford and Yorkshire, wider, and say to them, you can change history.
Thank you very much.